got a kind of unusual setup in my tiny house because I used sheetrock on the walls. And this makes people question whether putting sheetrock in their tiny house is a good idea or not. Without any further information, I wouldn't recommend sheetrock to tiny house owners. But it could very well be a good option. It just depends on your circumstances. I think for most tiny houses, it's probably not the best idea because most people are more than likely looking for a traveling, going from place to place type tiny house and not necessarily something that is going to stay in one location for years and years. So if you're not going to be moving very much, I think sheetrock is a pretty good idea because it does look nice and it does come with a standard home type look. So if that's what you're wanting, then and you're not going to be moving very often, then sheetrock's probably a pretty good option. If you are going to be moving a lot, then you probably don't want, one, the added weight, and two, the added work that comes with patching sheetrock. Now, when you put sheetrock up on the walls, you're going to have to mud the joints in between the sheetrock. And that's the only issue with the sheetrock is the mudded joints, because the panels will shift slightly as you're going down the road, and it's just enough to create a hairline crack in the mudded joint. And that causes an issue because every time you move, you have to patch over that, and that does take some time and a little bit of work, and it's not the easiest option if you want to be able to just move and call it good. But if you decide that sheetrock is what you really, really want and you don't have another option to get the look that you're going for, then you can use sheetrock, but you're going to have to deal with the problems that sheetrock creates. The main problem is those hairline cracks, aside from the added weight. But if you've got a large enough tiny house with heavy enough axles, then you don't have to worry about that weight nearly as much. But the main problem is the cracking. So how you can kind of fix that? There's a couple of options. The first option is to use as large of a piece of sheetrock as you possibly can when you're putting the sheetrock up on the walls. Why that's important is that if you use the large pieces, there's less seams, which means that there's less points that you're going to have to mud, so there's less points of failure, which is important with the tiny house because less points of failure means less work on your part. Second, there are some expansion joints that you can use that will allow some movement in the pieces of sheetrock and keep them from moving they'll allow them to move actually, which means that they'll move instead of the mud moving, which means that the sheetrock can move back without cracking the mud around the expansion joint. Another option is to put a plywood or OSB base behind the sheetrock and then overlap the pieces so that way the seam of the sheetrock is right in the middle of a piece of plywood. And that will add a little bit of extra sturdiness to the setup, and that will give the sheetrock just that little extra bit because it's not on a 2x4, instead it's on a big old piece of wood where it's got more there so that it has a less chance of moving. But the final option, and this is going to take a lot more work on your part to try and figure out exactly how you can do this, but you can figure out some way to sort of trick the eye so that you don't see the crack even though it's there. Options are putting some sort of artwork up on the wall, having a couch down at the bottom, maybe having some trim up at the top, something like that, or even if you can put thin pieces of wood across the crack and then come up with some sort of artwork or design where the strips of wood look nice. You can do something like that and then you're not going to see the crack at all, and then you don't have to worry about that. So those are your 3 or 4 options there as far as how you can kind of eliminate the cracks in the first place, but more than likely with sheetrock they're going to happen. So you're just going to have to know that you're going to have to patch them at some point. But I hope that got you thinking, maybe learned something. But I hope you have a great week, and I will catch you on the next video.